Okay. I have this. I always do a postmortem note sheet, which, look ahead, I guess. Not public, because I don't feel like sharing it publicly. So you can just watch the stream if you want to read it. Alright, well, that's all set. Okay. So DLC, I always do a little post-mortem at the end of it, just kind of to recap how things went, revisit some of the reasons why things were the way that they were. So this will be a relatively dry kind of stream. Just chime in chat if you have any questions. Think of it like a fun little college lecture or whatever you want to view it as. But I'll check out the leaderboard and remark on things that happened. I unfortunately don't have any cool stats to show. I would like to post links to forums and stuff where people can provide their own input if they haven't yet. I'm not going to be able to remember to do all that, so go look at the Discord announcement post and just fill out the forms. That'd be great. That's I always look at them in various capacities. Sometimes people say funny stuff that has no chance of ever being in a future DLC, but I'll read them anyway. But we always get a variety of feedback from all that stuff. Yeah, you can link them if you want. They're just in the Discord announcement. All three of them are there for DLC Discord. There are 3 forums that are relevant. I'll respond to any feedback stuff, and we'll look at the best map poll results pretty soon. But first I'll talk about how DLC 4 came about. Thanks, Idol. If anyone hasn't done any of those forums, go right ahead, and thanks for doing them. So DLC is always about being pretty open to a lot of people. The core reason that DLC happens in the first place, the DLC would not exist if not for teams making maps. That's the first and most important thing on the DLC intent, like original purpose kind of list. Where, like, it'd be great to have a league where we play a bunch of stuff, but how is this all going to come together? The only reason that this exists in the first place is because we have such a dedicated map making community that is also willing to make maps. So by putting people on teams and having the teams make maps, that guarantees that they have something interesting to work together on, and also we all have something interesting to play. The themes help unify the maps. Those got refined over time. We, in DLC 1, only had gameplay themes as the only themes. DLC 2 added the aesthetic themes, and the reason for that was again in line with the intent of DLC to make maps together, make it more inclusive for people that didn't have as much experience making maps. So aesthetic themes and gameplay themes are purely to bring up the less experienced map makers, not to hold down anybody, because we've always been very lenient about actually enforcing themes. We're very flexible when it comes to people with different preferences in the community. people that either can or can't play DLC. It wouldn't really work if it were purely competitive. We don't have that many people in the community. It's just a small community. And when you start to think about who would actually be competitive in an event like this, and you think about DLC, well, the top players were their own team for a reason this time. We do kind of just dominate. And this is the only time that we've been able to do something like that, but I'll speak about that in more detail why later. But the skill gaps are just huge. Some people have played this a lot, and some people can play a lot. So for the few people that are able to commit a lot to playing and are good, they can pretty reliably compete. And you might, if this were a very competitive event, then players that are new to the game or something like that, they probably wouldn't enter. And then the people at the bottom are just like, well, here I am sitting at the bottom. What's the point for me to compete when I'm just going to be beaten by everybody? Well, they drop out, and that leaves more people at the bottom that feel exactly the same, and the cycle continues until we basically only have like less than 10 people doing anything in the community for competition. And it is considerably less than 10 people when it comes down to it. Because competition isn't really that popular in Dustforce ultimately. So, although I want to encourage competition, I can't neglect the many people that are not actually that competitive. And I need to make sure that it's fun even if you aren't competitive, because we gotta have, you know, like in other communities, they gotta have the pot fillers. You know, we gotta have those people that can sweeten the pot, even if it's not like a paid event or anything. You know, there is no prize money, so we don't really need to milk the people that go 0-2 in a double limb bracket, you know? So we don't have to worry about that, but we gotta make sure that they're happy in our community, so gotta make it fun for everybody. As for the final point, a unique and challenging environment for grinding and map making, you know, that's what it is. You don't have any environment like this in Dustforce. There is no real competition in the game when it comes to leaderboard action. Leaderboard updates, the channel barely gets any attention. There's always like some new person every year or two that makes some minor waves, but that's all it is, you know. Maybe we'll get an update every other day or so at best. So we've relatively outlived our competitive kind of lifespan when it comes to the game, in my opinion. You know, even myself, speaking as one of the top players, I'm not even that competitive of a player. I'm not in it for competition. DLC is not made for me. I made it because of the first reasons. You know, just a fun thing to do together with a bunch of other people. Encourages competition at multiple levels of play. I've personally done stuff in other communities before. Most notably, I've been a pretty active Melee and, in general, Smash tournament host. So I have a decent amount of experience, like, you know, years of doing stuff in communities, not just Smash, when it comes to running events and that kind of stuff. And I've done a lot of different things like invitationals and circuits, and any of that. It's not limited to just playing games either, just like other kinds of local community stuff. I somehow am usually one of the people that steps up. So I'm just used to doing some of this stuff. You know, that's why I keep doing it, I guess. I'm just used to doing it. But I just want to make something fun for a lot of people to enjoy. And there is definitely good opportunity in this community for it. Otherwise, we wouldn't really have that much, just CMRs. And in my opinion, those have somewhat run their course as well. So it's been good to shake things up, not just with DLC, but with other events. So as far as past DLCs are concerned, for those unaware, DLC 1, that one was interesting. Let me get up the leaderboards for each of these. I'll show them a little bit. Alright, DLC 1. So we had 8 teams. Here's 2, 3. So DLC 1 had 8 teams. We had some silly point values. We had bonus points for people that voted on the best map of the week. So best map of the week, I got a few extra bonus points. That was kind of neat. Each week, we had fun color coding. So we had 6 leaderboards per week, or it's not 6 leaderboards, 6 levels per week. Each one had an SS and an 80% leaderboard. For every placement on every level, we give out points. So absolutely everything counted. Nothing's dropped. You know, that's just what it was. Everything counted. SS and 80%, 6 levels. That's 12 leaderboards. They all count. So this strictly. Also, there was no break week, so it was 4 weeks in a row. Maps were released on. Was it Sunday? I think still. So maps were released on Sunday, and then leaderboards end on Sunday. Then you start to make the new maps for the following week, and at the same time we release the maps for this week. So what would happen is, so say at the start of week 1, we would, so it starts with practice week. Practice week, we had some maps come out. Here are the week 1. Here's the week 1 theme. Start making week 1 maps during practice week. People made a bunch of maps during practice week. Practice week didn't count for points, which has always been the case. And then when practice week's over, let's watch some replays. There was no replay hiding. That script didn't exist yet. And immediately after we score week 1, we're on to week 2. No break at all. So quite exhausting for a lot of people. Only the dedicated, you know, the people often at the top. You see Camel, Fishy, and me up there pretty often. JVC's up there. We got Fresh and Uckies. Snow. Bobma had a snipe on 1 level in week 1. We had some MSG action into Pop played a level. But it was primarily Fishy, Camel, me for action this league. For DLC 2, we introduced replay hiding. So at this point, we had the point of DLC 2 was all-star teams. So every week, with the same schedule as DLC 1, by the way. Every week we had a leaderboard for each character. 1 person per team gets a character, each character. So 4 players on a team. The teams Here are the teams. We had Alex is Handsome was the most stacked team of the DLC 2. But we had a pretty chaotic kind of system here. So, because we knew that teams were not going to be balanced going in, because people were choosing their teammates, then, you know, we'll go for something with a little less predictability. So you just choose your character each week, and then those are the people on the character leaderboard. All the levels, you could play them just as each character, and there were some bonus points for overall world record. This ended up working out pretty well. It was still as exhausting, but it was no longer as big of a deal because only SS mattered, and only for the character that you played, and only your top 4 of your 6 levels counted. We also took away the ability to score on your own level, and it was impossible to watch replays at all. So the script at that time, we did not have the ability to hide it based on the team. We could only hide it, and then that was it. So people had to make streamables and stuff like that in their team channels to share strats. But there were only 4 people per team, so the amount of strat sharing you could really do when you each also had a different character was a little limited. You just kind of did your own thing. So that also introduced challenges. So challenges were very different. It was there was one challenge, or each team could challenge or could make one challenge, and they would wager a certain number of points, which would increase every week, and often they would be a little strange. They weren't very adopted. It was a pretty obvious failure for challenges early. Because of this not working as intended, we moved to challenges being individual in DLC 3, which you know, that was DLC 2. Here's DLC 3. This one was the most balanced one, probably, or at least on paper. We had a lot of different stuff going on in DLC 3. So on DLC 3, for each level, there were multiple leaderboards that all mattered. There were only 4 teams, so there were only 4 levels per week. We also introduced break week, and team replays were made possible. There were wagers and challenges. We introduced tasks, the 2-player leaderboard, side leaderboards were I mean, this DLC was full of side leaderboards. There were a lot of different leaderboards. There was a tier 3 leaderboard, and the players were split into 3 tiers based on seeding roughly. It always happens that the most active players, regardless of their tier, are gonna win stuff anyway. So there were a handful of adjustments that needed to be made, but pretty successful overall. Handled a lot of possible issues, but didn't really solve everything. In response to DLC 3, we ended up doing a lot of things that we did in DLC 4, the way that we planned them. But there are some consistent lessons that are learned from all these DLCs. No one reads announcements, so we can't really communicate rules or details, so I put them everywhere. It's always good to avoid overcomplicated systems though, just because people don't read anything or understand anything. And it's not like I'm actually good at communicating as well. I do not often come up with efficient ways to word things, but you know, I do what I can. Very consistently, people don't take initiative when they play in DLC. They don't like taking risks, so challenges are usually avoided because people don't like losing a few points, even though it's just a few points. But people are extremely adverse to that, and like this is a big deal. It pushes away basically everybody. But just as much as that pushes away people, the act of people having to do it themselves, take that initiative, no one's gonna bother doing that most of the time. So for the people that do want to do that kind of stuff, I want to include it because it's very interesting. It makes for very meaningful challenges, and I'm not talking about like mechanical challenges. I'm talking about actual challenges for people. It's very interesting gameplay, very interesting results, decisions to make. People have actual purpose when they like to do this kind of thing. So I want to keep these kinds of systems that are good for the people that want to use them. So I want to keep challenges, but they do not ever get used to the fullest extent, ultimately. And I'm not talking about like the way they were used this time either. I still think that they weren't used, and it left a really big hole in DLC once again because challenges still aren't being used. But people just aren't willing to do that kind of thing. I wouldn't say that you use them well, honestly. It's just that no one bothered. At the end of DLC, no one cared. That's why people just did them anyway, for those kinds of situations. But this time they promoted, I'll talk about it later, but the open rules promoted certain behaviors that are not good for DLC and will very much hurt it in the long run. They're just straight up detrimental. Like you can do them once or something and have fun with it, maybe, for anyone that did have fun, but it's just going to be a reason why people don't come back. So I have to be very careful about having certain kinds of rules with challenges, which was something learned from DLC 2, because the way that some people did challenges actively make them not want to continue playing DLC. So I have to be careful about it. If people try to do them their way, they'll actually screw themselves over and just quit. So I need to exercise some control over limitations for them. But they're obviously not all bad. I very, very much like the system. And it's just not for everyone, and that's kind of the point of it. It's nice to be able to design a system that is not for everybody, because you can tailor it to a specific crowd, So that's kind of the point of challenges. And if I change how they work to solve a short-term solution, a short-term problem, it'll hurt it in the long run. And I have to be very careful how I play around that, because I did some similar things in DLC 3. DLC 3 was the first one that I made mid-DLC adjustments during break week, because that was also the time that I introduced break week. And that was okay. It wasn't good enough, but I did some little band-aid solutions, and they saved face. But I'd never do that again. I'd never actually commit to certain things like that. The only reason it works is because it's there for a limited amount of time. So I just have to be careful about these systems, or I'm gonna push people away. But ultimately, there's you know, regardless of the system, this point is very true. There is very hard to balance for all manners of skill level and activity levels. And people don't just want to play everything, you know? Not everyone's gonna do everything. So just make it interesting for the people that want to do it, and make it surface level interesting enough for the people that want to do a little bit. So with DLC 4 in mind, following DLC 3, the first things that came to mind, so straight from DLC 3, the main adjustments to make, I wanted a few more teams and I wanted the teams to be a little smaller, because I was getting the feeling from DLC 3 that the big teams hurt them in some ways, such as like some people not feeling like, you know, they mattered that much on such a large team. There were only 4 teams. The teams were actually about the same size in the end, but ultimately these teams effectively were a little smaller. That's just because of participation, but it varied depending on the team. The overall structure mirrored DLC 3, such as the schedule, challenges worked the same, the team selection structure, how those were chosen, those all worked the same way. But I did want to take out role assignments. So in DLC 3, every week there were so I made the captains fill out, you know, just only look at, say, this section. The Z team, as you know, their title was actually the Z team. They had to fill in this. So J-Dude, the captain, filled this in each week. These are all of the roles that ended up being filled. And then this column was for challenges and wagers, for bonus points. So each team captain had a little section to fill out. And then you weren't allowed to play a map that you made. We split teams in half, so that, you know, they made one of the maps during break week and the other half made the other map. That just avoided a little bit of advantage for map makers. But I like what we did in DLC 4 ultimately. But yeah, you had to fill in this every week, and people would pick the leaderboards that they wanted to play on, but it ended up being more like assignments than I want to choose certain levels, because people don't choose stuff on their own, actually. They just kind of play whatever they want, and then we had to choose for them. So that was not ideal. Got to switch that up. So we'll just let people play what they want, and then it turns out there's no need for any of these systems. Like, there's no reason for a captain anymore. There's no responsibility other than choosing your team. Wagers didn't work as a system the way that I wanted to. It relied on a different kind of balance. It could have worked in this league a little bit better, I think, but keys were a good replacement. They serve a totally different purpose. And challenges are just better of a system than wagers. Wagers are more of a misnomer. They started as a different kind of idea and just kind of evolved over time. And then people just hated the idea of losing points. So, you know, that's just chalk that up to lessons learned. People don't want to take risks at all. Like, nothing at all. They won't do it. -1 point, doesn't matter if you've got thousands of points as a team. I don't want to lose 1 point. So that's just little DLC 3 adjustments. I knew in the middle of DLC 3, quite a lot of things that I was going to do for DLC 4 actually. And keys were what the resulting system ended up being. Keys were decided a little bit later that they would actually be keys. But originally it was more about having multiple goal or dev times or author times in each level. So there would be tiers for each one. It gave players of each tier, however many tiers there would be, a clear goal for each level for SS. So very importantly, this would actually lower the amount of competition for the levels, because it provides a very clear endpoint for people. So by making things less competitive at the level of play for or for all but the top levels of play, then I don't have to worry about people getting too burnt out on competing without trying things like challenges. It was a huge backfire in DLC 1. I was partially convinced to have a every single placing had points associated with it. That did not work at all. So it might sound cool in theory, like, oh yeah, like no matter what you get some points for it. It makes everything matter. But what actually matters, that has been adopted since DLC 2, is encouraging ties. So encouraging people to be okay with tying for a certain number of points. So this provided a separate place for people to stop and still contribute to their team by earning keys. And the keys would also be able to work for themselves. So, you know, you could receive a ranking depending on what kind of tiers you met at the end of the week. It doesn't matter for anything, but for the people that care about that kind of thing, they can have it. That worked out okay ultimately, but you know, in theory, it's a big improvement for an idea. It also solved a big problem, which was that map makers previously didn't playtest their maps, and this was a big problem for past DLCs, that no one bothers to actually play their maps, whether they count on them or not. So I was able to solve a few problems by letting this be the case in theory. If the map maker teams are setting times to beat, then they are actually testing their maps more and improving the quality of their maps. You know, it goes hand in hand. That's obviously not what happened, but we're talking about what the original ideas were. So, you know, sounds pretty solid in theory. It obviously evolved after that. With this key system in mind, the eventual key system, I wanted there to be less scoring at the top. I wanted it to be less top heavy for points. So I wanted it to come more from challenges and team participation, which is something that all players would be able to do. So they would be able to get their keys, and then if they want any competition, they can focus on things like challenges, which are on the leaderboards that are already specified, you know, the automatically scored leaderboards. So if they're the kind of person that wants to compete, they can compete through challenges and have as much impact as anybody else through challenges. So just by earning keys, you contribute a little bit and you reach the goals that you want to set for yourself. And by doing challenges, you can still earn points even if you're not going for world record. So challenges and world records and that kind of stuff have to be relatively similar in point value as a result. I also need far fewer people to score at the top in order to further discourage people from grinding 4 points specifically, because people grinding 4 points does actually lead to them not enjoying DLC. In the case of the people that would want to earn keys. So, like, those people are not there to compete for points. I don't want to, like, dangle points in front of them for the people that don't want them. Because that adds a little bit more stress than people actually want when it comes to playing for competition. Makes it more inviting to people that are just there to get some goals, which is much like how they normally play levels. Except, you know, this time they have real goals to aim for. I also wanted short maps. So, you know, that's a pretty easy thing to solve. A lot of the competition in DLC, both in the past and what we saw this time, is very centered on a short amount of time, actually. So although we have a week to play the maps, and it is very lenient and nice because of that, the people that set records on them and play them the most really aren't playing them for that long. And there's a lot of actual downtime during the week. So it makes it very lenient where you could play like 1 level a day, and that's kind of all you need to do. And you barely even have to worry that you're going to get bopped on anything after you play it, because there isn't really that much grind war going on in DLC. It's a good environment for it, but it's not really encouraged that much. And in the past, there was, you know, just more ability to do things like snipes near the end, just because of the next point, which is early deadlines. So having earlier deadlines would lower the sniping power. People only playing at the end of the time frame near the deadline. You know, in an ideal world, if you were trying to win, you do not want to give any information to your opponent for like how fast you could possibly go. And if you have all the information, then you know your opponent's times to beat. And if you assume that they're not going to play the level again, you just have a very clear time. I'll just beat this and then I'll win. That's a lot easier for anyone to do. So it just makes sense. Why wouldn't you bother doing that? There's still ample opportunity with early deadlines to play close to any deadlines, but by having some bonuses associated with them, you could, in theory, encourage people to play the level a little bit earlier for some bonus points and encourage more back and forth bopping. Also, it worked really nicely with limiting advantaged map makers by not making them eligible for bonus points, and then they can just play their level later anyway. So that was a good solution overall, as far as I'm concerned. Good idea. But because people don't play maps for long, and people do like the quick grind wars, that's why short maps worked. And in order to encourage some back and forth and some activity early in the week, that's why early deadlines work. DLC 3 had a lot of leaderboards per level. We need to have fewer leaderboards per level and not as many gimmicks. So maybe only one side leaderboard per level, and we'll leave that one up to the map maker. It'd be best to balance that between a normal kind of leaderboard, like any percent, or SS as this character instead of some other character, and some gimmicks and plugins. You know, we'll have a nice little balance there. So with all this in mind, I'm still thinking, you know, this is a multi-month process. I have all these ideas post DLC 3. At some point, I'm talking with people like Camel in particular about like, here are some of the challenges associated with if I have to be the one to approve all of these key times, and I'm guaranteeing that all the map makers are playing their levels and making videos for them playing all of their levels, and I'm looking at all these strats and all that stuff. That's potentially a crazy advantage for me, and there's no reason that I should play yet again if I'm gonna manage the league. And I've opted out of playing in DLC 2 because I don't like to get myself involved when I have some kind of advantage like that, and it's much easier to just manage it and not have the burden of playing also. And I really hate it when there's any amount of overlap between like a possible conflict of interest. You know, that just ruins it every time for me, including this past one. It had its moments that just make me feel like I shouldn't have bothered. But the idea for the top player team came from making the management of setting these goal times easier, and also enforcing some of the other things previously mentioned. But primarily, there's been a joke like, you know, we really can't have certain players on the same team. That would be unfair. So it would be unreasonable, but always funny to joke about things like, oh yeah, what if me and Camel or me and Fishy are on the same team? That'd be crazy. Well, this time the joke became more reality because of a few things lining up. So like I said, I barely would compete anyway, and I'd have to work on goal times. But I could have others help with the goal times, rather than rely on an uneven representation from other teams, because map makers might have varieties of skill levels. A bigger issue was with only 6 teams and fewer possible top players, I'm running into a possible problem of balance, where there's just like Camel and Fishy and Uckies kind of out there in the open, but there are 6 teams, and that means there are 3 teams that are not gonna get any of them. And that's a kind of big deal, actually. So I'm not sure how I want to handle that. And I look at all the other players, and we actually have a relatively low kind of expectation for DLC 4's skill level on average at the top. I do think this was one of the weaker ones for average top level skill and activity, for that matter. That's one of the reasons. So why not take out the top players and allow everybody else to just compete with themselves? Like I said, I've run a lot of melee events in the past, and other Smash events. I've done unranked tournaments before. Those are always fun. It's nice to do that kind of variety. This is the best time I can justify any of these kinds of ideas. So we start thinking of ideas, how we can compete top players versus the world. I get Fishy and Uckies on board, and then Fresh. I also did reach out to Amber Fish, who unfortunately declined, but would have been cool to have another one. You know, considering the opportunities that could have been out there for who could have been top player, I wanted to keep it relatively limited, only a few active ones, because I really can't afford there to be a big active team for top players. But there were ideas for ways to compete. and some of these were not used, and I do want to revisit them. Also, side note, related to that, the dev time idea, that idea has been around for a while as well. That's something that I failed to implement in DLC 3 efficiently, so I really wanted to do it in DLC 4, because it would have worked out pretty well if it happened in DLC 3. Some of these things you could easily predict could happen in DLC 5, because some of these actually didn't happen. So beat top player time after X minutes. Compare this to the invert times, what was intended for invert times. These are 5 different ways that top players in the world can compete with each other. So let's say I give the top players 10 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on the level, how complex it is to play it. We have a little competition with ourselves, who can get the best time in that amount of time without helping each other. And what do we get? Surprise, it's way too hard for everybody to beat. You know, that's what it ended up being. So we obviously had to nerf that, but it's a good idea. Beat our final world record, even with a handicap. You know, let's give everybody else a day after we play the level to try to beat our times. Not many people were able to do that, but there were plenty of opportunities. And there were some successes. Top player challenges, those worked out. The open rules and handicaps open to anyone with no risk. Top players have a special challenge or puzzle on their level. Anyone can do that also. You don't just have to be good at the game to try to do this. This would be for people like, say, Cal or Miles that want to solve these kinds of puzzles. You know, those are the kinds of players that are interested in these kinds of things. So they're trying to be the first person to figure out how Apple SS works. So these are puzzles. I wanted to have some puzzles on levels. But it is quite difficult to come up with puzzles, so that obviously didn't work out. I wanted the top players to come up with a special goal or challenge that is also open to everybody, similar to a key. For example, let's say Camel does a low direction SS on some level. That's just a bonus little key, pretty much. Very comparable to that. Would be very good to revisit those last 2 ideas, in my opinion. I do want to revisit those for sure. They just didn't work out this time, unfortunately. Top players can still compete with each other, and in setting the key times, they can, you know, have like a little scoring system themselves for fun, for that kind of competition. It's neat for top players to be able to help each other out for the first time ever as well. You know, it's quite a unique situation for us to be able to help each other's routes and other things. But most importantly, I could never ever justify this kind of twist ever again. So we might as well try it out. I did also, because we may or may not make maps, I would ask Cameo map makers that otherwise wouldn't participate at all if they want to make maps with us. We did have a esteemed map maker, Camel from previous DLC fame, having the highest voted map from DLC 2, and I guess well received other maps. But not much other map experience. So we needed some map making help. So I asked a few people. Only C ended up following through. We almost got Twinkie. Captains didn't have a use anymore, so I wanted to replace them for little groups of 2 or 3 These would be the people that signed up together. For example, if you signed up wanting to team with a certain player, you would be considered with them to be a team rep and make the base for your team and choose the rest of the members. And it helps guarantee that teams started with good synergy and activity, because at least we have a core starting point. But that's all they had to do. So those are all the ideas. There's a lot going into the ideas. So let's talk about how it turned out. Now, it went pretty well, I guess. There's not too much to say about the positives, in my opinion. It was like a refined DLC 3. And it had a side event. It had keys. Keys went very well. The teams, for the most part, showed good synergy, and we improved on the past lessons. In summary, it was a nice evolution of DLC 3, but there were a lot of issues that are more important to improve on. And I talk about any of those other things below. But things generally went well. I wouldn't quite call it a big success or anything, but there were some big issues. I had a lot of problems with it behind the scenes. I really struggled to come up with 5 teams that felt cohesive, honestly. It was a stretch to get people to want to choose other teammates. That's something that has always been the case. It's just tough to convince people to want to, lead, in quotes, a team when there's not much leading that actually happens. It's a very tough ask, actually. My idea to start with the team reps that way was a pretty good solution, but I just struggled to come up with enough of them. So in retrospect, it makes me feel like I can't really justify having that many teams unless I have a good mechanical reason for doing so, or something that has a good reason to have more teams built into the league, such as the 4-player teams. It was built into the league. The teams are only 4 players, so there are a lot of little teams. So I need something like that if I'm gonna have smaller teams. Otherwise, I just can't justify it. There's not enough team cohesion otherwise. Balance was questionable. It's always unpredictable, so this is always in retrospect, kind of feeling. I can't really argue in the moment if all the team reps are just like, yeah, we're okay with this. And in the back of my head, I'm just like, there are possible issues that I could see coming true, but I don't want to rain on people's, little feeling with that. We rated Plant C tier. Plant definitely belonged in mid tier, 100%. Looking at the history for Plant does not imply anything about how well they'll actually perform when they have to play. So, Plant was as reliable as, say, I Heart Cake was for DLC 2. They just have an Infini SS. Maybe they can play some levels, but I don't think rating Plant low or anything was a bad thing. I made it very, very clear with all of the team reps that any of these players, whether they're at the top or in the middle or at the bottom, they could do any amount of work on each team. They're very roughly grouped by how likely they might impact the team. But the tiers made absolute no impact on people's final decisions. They were not supposed to reflect actual skill or anything like that. And it's not like, you know, anyone saying plant is good, you know, a couple people saying plant is good, that doesn't mean anything. Like, you gotta back it up. So, was it avoidable? Maybe a little bit more avoidable. Did people help me? No. It wasn't meaningful. Did it matter? No. It worked as intended. There were far bigger issues than plant when it comes to balance. In particular, Ike Ether had Duck and Arb. I also made it incredibly clear that people's activity numbers are not to be trusted. Duck is very clearly not a 2, so we memed it all DLC. A couple people thought it was serious, like JVC apparently. Didn't realize it was a meme. But Duck is very clearly not a 2. He will very obviously play it much more than anyone else when it comes to certain things. So, some people like Joel were an 8. Joel didn't really play at all. There are a lot of examples of like, this person put a low number, but they're not gonna be that low. Keep that in mind. This person put a really high number. I don't trust that. You know, I made that kind of stuff clear. So for the people that chose their teams, I made it very clear it's going to be unpredictable what happens. It's on the teams themselves to encourage people to actually participate. So, like, you could say Argon Avengers, they were not very active. Well, actually, let me remind you something. They earned the second most number of keys, and they did reasonably well on points in week 1. So I did tell every team that every team has the potential to fall off, and I meant it very seriously. Absolutely every team lacked a certain amount of depth, and it's on them to encourage people to play. But as we'll uncover briefly, that is dependent on other systems at play. And in particular, there were certain things that contributed to some players not wanting to continue, or some players not really wanting to, or being able to anyway. So people were okay with the teams. You know, that's good enough. As long as people enjoyed the teams that they were on, then that was fine with me. Even considering how how iffy something like this looks, this number of wood keys is pretty indicative of how many people are playing the levels anyway per team. You can assume that at minimum each person is earning, or not each person, at minimum the number of players on a team is this over 6, because a player at most can contribute 6 to the number of wood keys, or any key for that matter. So having 10 active players on any team, that's huge. That's very big, way better than any other DLC. Having only 5 active on Argon Avengers, honestly not unexpected, considering past DLCs. Better than previous times in some places. And they still only fell off primarily after week 2, but didn't do themselves any favors by not having active players at the top. It is what it is. When you're okay with picking inactive players at the top, and the people right under that don't end up stepping up, not whether they're not interested or can't, it just happens sometimes. But it does, it obviously looks worse than it really is. This 31 looks way worse than, or doesn't look at all as bad as, say, 13 compared to this. That's just because keys are worth a lot, and there's that downward spiral of when you start to not do well, then you continue to not do well or care. So the balance ended up contributing to that. I couldn't prepare adequately, as evidenced by this postmortem as well. Pretty lackluster in my opinion. I'm not really doing that much behind the scenes. But it is what it is. Like, I don't get anything from this. I just do this on my own time. So there's no benefit to me for running DLC. I just do it for fun. And I don't get that much help, so I do what I do, and I'm okay with it, but I always think it's a huge failure every time, so oh well. Very, very critical of myself when it comes to not being able to do what I want to do, because this is not something to brag about in my opinion. It's just incredibly inadequate. It could be so much better if it were like a big production. But people enjoy it. It's a small community. No one really cares that much. So it's not that big of a deal. So I at least do what I can, and ran into some issues when it came to my own time early, so I couldn't really wrap it up in time and had to do some things during practice week. I also had to figure out how the key times would work during practice week. There were too many possibilities, like what could be good and what might not be, and we were a little bit off. We didn't actually adjust much, but I did have to make adjustments, and that's never a good thing during practice week. I don't want to confuse people or anything like that, and some people have a habit of thinking practice week counts somehow, or is very included. I don't know. It's just a test week. It's just practice. Just try these out and test them for us. I'm not trying to oversell practice week as this is part of DLC. That's why they're not included on any of the map polls or anything like that. That's why there are no challenges. It's just practice week, and I want to try to get that across sometimes. The top player versus the world side event had very little depth and lacked much interest. It's very hard to think of interesting things that top players want to commit to. We had ideas, but we just couldn't commit to them. It was too hard to think of things like puzzles and other stuff that we could make goals for other people to do. And we did what we could with it. It was somewhat lackluster as a result, but I always had those little warning signs in my head, and I'm like, I don't really trust that top players versus the world is going to work out, and it pretty much didn't. The Dust Kid had some issues with hiding replays unintentionally that never got fixed. I mostly kept quiet about it because I didn't want to draw extra attention to it or like put MSG on blast or anything. That's obviously not my intention. But this did not work the way that I wanted to, and was one of the most frustrating things in DLC this time. It strictly made DLC harder to use the way that the change happened. So let me just be a little clear about what I'm talking about. So here's the Dust Kid main page. Imagine, let's say Summit Ramparts, those are all DLC levels all of a sudden. I just want to hide these values. That's it. That's all I wanted to happen. I don't want the inputs to show up when you go to search replays. Same thing. Maybe we could just hide these columns. I tried to suggest, but unfortunately, the implementation was not what I wanted. They got hidden entirely and hard to find. You could only find them on the replay search. So couldn't really do anything else about that, unfortunately. Very not ideal. But fortunately, people were able to deal with it. So don't want to go through that again. I did say I would rather have it I can't remember the word. Reset to what it was for DLC 3. But anyway, let's talk about how much Top Players vs. the World failed. But first, it had some okay moments, I guess. Top players are still pretty good, so they were still impressive. They dominated despite handicaps, which made for some interesting goals and bonuses that people could try to beat them. And it still felt good for the people that could beat them whenever they did, probably. Sometimes. It helped other teams map making a lot. Camel helped a lot with setting keys and testing maps in particular. And I had a lot of fishy help for setting invert keys as well. Uckies and Fresh had varying amounts of help with this, but definitely contributed as well. But in total, it wasn't fun. It wasn't interesting. I didn't have fun with it. It was a pretty big failure in my opinion. I kept most things to myself with how awful Top Players vs. the World was going, in my opinion, because I mean, I thought it was a really stupid system how it was working out. Yeah, hidden replays just worked. You'd click on the replay and then it just wouldn't work in game. So you could still see the replay link, but you would also see like how many dashes they have and how many jumps they have, how many attacks they have. And I wanted to hide that piece of info because it would add a little bit more mystery to what's going on. Just a little bit more like less gaming the system. Ever since DLC 2, I've wanted to hide this, but it has not been fulfilled yet. So one day we will hide this info. We did hide ledge cancel histograms this time, so there were no more memes about how many ledge cancels people were doing. No one really even said anything about it either, from what I noticed. But that's probably just because the replays were so annoying to get at anyway, and you couldn't have the fun of just seeing like, hey, look at Fresh grinding Observatory. Like, hey, that's cool. Fresh is just going really hard on DLC this week. Observatory known DLC map. We really missed out on that this week, or this DLC. But I, for the most part, bit my tongue on Top Players vs. the World because I thought it was just a bad system. And I don't want to complain about it while DLC is going on, because then like other people are gonna latch on to it and be like, this system's dumb, and then people are not gonna like other things about DLC. So just don't bother spreading the negative while it's going on, and just kind of change course to other directions. There's also the really annoying combination of me being on the Top Players team, so anything I say could be construed as biased in some way, especially when the top players are supposed to be the villains, and we're there to be beaten, which, that's not really that fun of a position to be in all the time. It's a cool kind of role to have, but not many people can pull it off. You know, if you're thinking about criticizing, say, any kind of story or movie or something like that, and you're trying to judge the villain's character, you know, we didn't really make for that interesting villain characters, ultimately. We really only got Fishy to go in, like, someone's channel once or twice at the beginning, which kind of set the stage, and it was cool. We had some cool moments. Like, oh, you think that's invert key? LOL. You know, classic fishy quotes. But any complaining that I would make about top players versus the worlds, because of how potentially world biased and the world's not even really trying at it, you know, that's just in poor taste, for multiple reasons. And any balance changes that I would try to make for it, those could also be misconstrued. So it's just a bad position to be in. Like, why would I ever bother participating in a DLC myself as the organizer if any possible change that I could make to better the system can possibly get misconstrued? So it's just a really tough thing to pull off. But I think I made adjustments as well as I could have. I mostly diverted attention away from it, but that was in dealing with the problem. I just don't think it was very interesting. It was not very compelling for people. There was no competition for top players. No one's there willing to bop us back on all of these levels. So let me go through some of these levels. Now, I can barely speak because I barely played any of these levels, but just in looking at them, actually I'll look at the summary. So at the bottom, ignore how my scroll wheel works if you even notice. So you can see all of the world records that were won by the top players on this page. So on primary leaderboards, and unfortunately I don't have the stats for players like I wanted to have. We lost 1 in week 1, 1 in week 2, and we didn't lose any others. So the top players won all but 2 of the main SS leaderboards. And the world had an extra day to beat our times. And I think that amount of time is absurd. It makes it very incredibly easy for certain side leaderboards that are not grinded much at all. And there was 1 or 2 each week of those, because like people didn't really care about them. Yeah, not that much. But in terms of grind wars, nothing. There was no back and forth. People would just get PBs and just leave. And that's not even to talk about, like, we wanted that out of the keys. That happened at the high level kind of gameplay also. There just weren't really people that did anything about that. The only thing that happened was Arb played OJ Factory, you know, right after the top player deadline, and we thought there was going to be more of that, but that was the only one that happened. On Smelloscope, we actually didn't have anyone play that level at all until the final hour, which was just barely not enough time for Fishy to be able to beat the record. I think Fishy started with like 40 minutes or so. We didn't even have a route that was comparable to the world record until then. So, you know, that's for being a few frames away, it was not really that bad of an idea in theory. Like, Scope worked out pretty well in this respect, but we only had like, you know, just over 30 minutes to be able to play the level in order to make it close. And for that being one of the only two primary world records that was taken, really says a lot for how much people cared for this kind of thing. Scope had the advantage of being frame grind. Well, yeah, kind of. But you could say, on the other hand, OJ Factory had the advantage of being a normal level, which involved strats that may or may not have been capitalized on. But I can name so many of the top player world records and just be like, this one's got like a 0.3 mistake over here. And like, hey, we didn't do this strat. What if someone else did this strat? But then you look at things like Delo's wormhole, and it's just so hard for teams to come up with complete routes. There's just no competition at that kind of skill level, which in some ways we showed that that was the case, because, like, you know, we did it. Wonder of Blue, no one bothered to play Worth, just us. And we left it there for days. No competition on 2-player, separate issue. But, you know, pretty big failure in my opinion for how it worked out. The world was not very unified. There was not much activity. But there's just, you know, like A-Boss just said, it's just hard to beat people like Fishy. There is a huge skill gap. When it came to top player challenges, it was the most important thing here before the challenges themselves still is the 24-hour deadline, which is honestly a lot, but in some ways it's not enough. So, like, yeah, you could have all the time in the world and still not be able to beat like top 10 on a level or something. But it's just a really tricky spot to be in. So it's just awkward, you know. In some ways you're like, people could have done this, but in other ways it's not worth enough, or it's too tough, or it is actually just that hard, and there's no good middle ground. So ultimately, there not being a good middle ground, just there's no good reason to have top players versus the world. You know, couldn't make it fun, ultimately. But fortunately, it was just a side event. It could have been more of a main event, I guess, if we found that sweet spot. But the way that the system works, both with the 24-hour deadline for top players and with how top player challenges were used, they both worked against it, in my opinion. So top players, they're looking for a little challenge, they're looking for some of that competition, but no one's bopping them, and usually win despite the complacency, and there's no one to bop back. So if the world just waits and then bop us, then we can't bop back, and you know, we wanted to, but we didn't get a chance. So no one really wanted to push it on either side. Top player challenges, they did at least succeed as the test case that they were, to open the door for open rules for all challenges. But that's not quite good enough in my opinion. even for open rules for challenges. They were a little less than anticipated because, you know, there's no risk at all to losing. Few people just wanted to do them. And I tried to encourage people like, hey, you know, there's no downside. You should try to spread the top players too thin. That'd be a good strategy, wouldn't it? And it just kind of fell off anyway. It's just hard to come up with those open-ended challenges ultimately, kind of like how they didn't work in DLC 2. And you know, that goes on both sides. We didn't really come up with challenges ourselves. The compel to accept rule also backfired a little bit because people weren't interested in doing normal or reasonable challenges, or also that reasonable challenges were too hard to grasp. There were more joke kind of challenges that were made that unfortunately took a little bit more spotlight, that, you know, otherwise are just in poor taste in my opinion, and are more there to take advantage of the rule set rather than anything else. And if we wanted those to be part of the feature, then I would have encouraged it more. And I tried to adjust the compel to accept rule a little bit for the second half, but, you know, too little too late. It was just always a lose-lose kind of scenario where people would just a lot of different things would happen. I mean, you know, all this highlighted spot, people often underrate their skill or advantage and want huge handicaps. You know, that's not always the case. Sometimes people don't want enough of a handicap, but it's too hard to predict where it'll end up. And if we try to predict where it will end up, that takes out some of the fun of figuring it out ourselves, and that goes for both sides. But you can't distinguish this kind of thing between good faith and bad faith, because, you know, they kind of look the same, and it's too easy and annoying for someone to, you know, more jokingly come up and be like, hey, it's me, bad player, help me, or give me a 2-second lead on this level, because I'm bad, by the way. And they'll, you know, self-deprecate, and I don't want that. You know, that's not a good thing to encourage. But it feels bad if we're like, no, that's unwinnable, lower the handicap, and then we win anyway. We wouldn't have won without the other handicap, but it's too hard to predict in the middle. It feels bad if it's not close in either direction, though. It feels bad if we decline it because it's unwinnable and they wanted to do something, and then a lot of the time they wouldn't be followed up on. So, you know, we're just strictly saying no, you know, in an improv setting, basically. So you feel bad accepting challenges, expecting to lose them, and you know, just feels bad anyway. So the only good scenario is if it's close, whether it's unique or not, and it's very hard to guess when they're so lopsided. When there are any kinds of handicaps at stake, it's very hard to guess. So it makes me, you know, the same kind of stuff applies to open rule challenges anyway, as well. So I do feel the exact same way about, like, say, the Naglaria Worth Pogo kind of stuff. You know, that fits some of this criteria pretty well. That's just an example of something that people were encouraged to do, but did not promote a good environment for, or did not promote a good result of the DLC environment. So I need to limit this to some degree, and I just gotta figure it out somehow. You know, I gotta refine the challenge rules somehow. Promoting a good result for you? I don't care. You know, if that kind of thing continues, people will actually abuse it. So it's just something tricky. You know, I gotta come up with some kinds of appropriate rules, and I can't let it go too far. I don't like the 2v1 challenge. I will forbid that kind of stuff in the future, whether you liked it or not, because that kind of thing does strictly promote the kind of result that does not go well in DLC. You know, that has similar failings to it where Top Players vs. the World failed. And although like there are some good things that can happen as a result of Top Players vs. the World, a 2v1 kind of challenge, it you know, it goes close to those lines of promoting those things that I don't want in DLC. In particular, that one had ability to snipe, and it also potentially creates unwanted stress for the people that have to play everything. So even if you happen to like it, you would not have probably liked it for the entirety of DLC doing that kind of stuff. And what often happens, and has happened in the past, is when people commit to a lot in challenges, they just burn out. So that's always what happens when I let people go too hard on challenges. So that's another reason why I like limiting challenges in general. It's just that people just stop playing. I gotta cut them off. They lose sight of what's fun in DLC. The scoring system for Top Players vs. the World, not very interesting, hard to test, very easily abused, 100% world favored, but people didn't care anyway, so it didn't matter. It was good to abandon this. I didn't draw any more attention to it because I wanted to make people actually have fun with the league rather than worry about this. But it was just awful for the top players. You know, if people like Uckies or Camel aren't even bothering to playing some of the levels, and they're pretty reliable players, like, you know, if we got people on the top player team not even interested in playing DLC and they're just doing other stuff, it's pretty obviously a failure. And that happened for everybody but me and Fishy from what I noticed. And the only reason it didn't happen for me was because I didn't bother playing that much anyway. As for the overall scoring system, you know, where some of it worked out, I think the scoring system worked pretty well as intended. Not ideally, you know, it's not the perfect scoring system. It's always different. We always have a different scoring system, but it worked about as well as it could have, with some minor flaws that add up. But for what it did well, I do like how it handled keys. They were pretty useful in unifying the teams, especially for the ones that bought into it. The high-level grinders are always going to perform best no matter what, and the team with the most of them is always going to win. That's unavoidable for DLC. That's just what happens. The world record contenders here were not so strictly powerful that they ended up winning, but we did have Ike Ether with the most activity at the top and also coincidentally winning. It was good to have the cap on keys as well. That way it didn't make certain teams run away with it. That was very important that we had a cap on the amount of points earned from keys. That's related to the question of why are keys not worth points, or should keys individually be worth points? And the problem with that is that it is too favored towards the most active players and the most active teams as well. And that's been the case in every league. This league kept it the closest in terms of most active players, other than Argon Avengers. It was still relatively pretty high overall, but Argon Avengers coincidentally just had more people that stopped playing, and didn't care as much for what was going on in the league this time, or also couldn't contribute to their team, whether they wanted to or not. But the scoring system did encourage people to play quite a bit more, so I think it worked out pretty well. So going in the right direction, in my opinion. Yeah, as far as those activity numbers are concerned, I made it pretty clear that they shouldn't be taken seriously, and we did more meme about it this time, like Duck putting down 2 was very clearly a meme target, because we knew that wasn't a 2. Epon also, yeah, Epon was not sure if he was gonna play at all, but did in fact end up playing. Epon actually put a 0. And there are a couple other people that put really low numbers that played quite a bit, but those were the 2 biggest ones. Yeah, we always just have to put it in context. So it's always in the context of the player. So if someone's 5 is, equal to somebody else's 1, I told people not to take it seriously. And we ended up, on average, pretty decent. There were some things that happened though as a result of the early deadlines, and there just being a lot of leaderboards anyway, a lot of stuff to do. So this has happened in the past as well. People rarely grind things continuously. There were very few people that bothered to go back to a level and like bob someone back. In particular, the person that probably did this the most was actually Plant, and that was one reason why Plant was one of the highest scoring players this league, because Plant did actually go back to the levels and actually try to compete, where some people just they'd get a time and leave. So that kind of behavior is always going to be most heavily rewarded. You know, that's right there at the top. It's always going to be most heavily rewarded. So whoever actually commits to doing it at a high level is going to score a lot of points. Arb had the most points, so just in looking at the points, so I don't have stats for you guys, unfortunately. But let's check out the total points. So we got Arb on top, Duck second, Plant third, JBC 4, Quantum Coral makes up the third person for Ike Ether, tying with Wazi. And we see a really big drop off. The main reason why is because very few people are capable of earning points, but also notice that Arb having 200 points is still as many points as one team can earn in 1 week by earning keys, compared to Arb for the entire league. And this is because Arb scored the best on leaderboards overall. Plant by 1 point over Duck. Duck had better challenge results. Arb also had the best early results, the most early world records, most early inverts and stuff like that. Didn't even benefit as much to challenges. Did benefit from top player versus the world points. Did end up beating more top player times. And won 2 of the task challenges. That's 10 points right there. We went even on the task challenges ultimately. I won weeks 2 and 4, I think. Yeah. But what that amounts to is 10 points for Arb. Nothing for me. But you know, that's just challenges for you. We had a lot of possibility for challenges in here. So as far as challenges are concerned, we had Duck and Naglaria, and then Plant earning a lot. Plant went pretty hard on challenges. Not Jake went really hard on challenges as well, and so did Miles, but they ended up losing a lot of them. Yeah, we were pretty close to even last time also. You and Fish tied, and me and Fresh tied. But we each got first ones, and we each got last ones. And Sasha also went back and forth with Fresh. Won one, lost one. And I made the tiebreaker a reality, I guess. But yeah, as far as points are concerned, this spread feels pretty appropriate. I think it worked out reasonably well. You know, week 1 is a good example for how it can go pretty early, where everybody's you know, raring to go. You know, turns out the Y team doesn't have enough active players to actually earn enough wood keys, so a bit of a warning sign for their team there. Argon Avengers earning the second most number of keys for wood keys, keeping pace pretty well. V ceilings with a crazy number of red keys. Somehow all the teams other than that getting 34 there. But these two teams with less invert key potential ended up being shown later on. But because keys were worth so much, that's just, you know, a quick 200 points difference that makes it look worse than it is. Also kind of not being willing to do challenges, throw away keys, throw away points in some cases. But there were pretty good reasons for that. So I think the scoring made sense for what we did. It did contribute though to there is always that downward spiral. Fun map reference, by the way. So teams that are not competitive lose interest. That's a DLC classic right there. I'd really like to solve that somehow. And I feel like that's I'm not gonna spoil certain things about DLC 5, but I have a pretty good idea that solves this problem. I'll just say. You'll be able to make your own fan theories about DLC 5 considering this. But some things encourage people to keep playing. Some people are not encouraged enough to keep playing. Keys. This is where my notes get a little bit drier or short. I actually didn't add any more detail to the key section here. I already talked about it a fair amount though. But I need more higher highs and lower lows, especially if the top players don't end up on their own team again. Because like invert keys were kind of the prerequisite for a lot of top 10s. That system worked pretty well. The wood keys, they were also in a pretty good spot in my opinion. The evolution of key difficulty was also a factor that I think in theory worked better than it actually worked out. I think it didn't really amount to anything. But in premise, so what happened was the invert keys from week 1 were like, even though it's nice that all teams got all the invert keys, would really prefer if teams were in the 30-point range. This is actually ideal. We want most teams to be on this kind of cutoff for keys if they're inactive. So if a team is inactive, they should be like borderline, like just pushing it and able to get the 30-point cutoff. So it's not asking for too much in my opinion, but by the end of the league it wasn't good enough, so it was looking like it was asking for a little too much ultimately. I would have preferred if Argon Avengers were motivated enough to go for one of these tiers rather than not even bother. And that goes for both of the second half weeks. But it's ideal if they reach the 30 points and we have everybody kind of getting these. And there would be very rare outliers of people in this range. Because these numbers are really not asking for that much in my opinion. If all teams were active, they could easily do this. And all teams had the capacity to do so. But obviously, not everybody's going to do it. I've continued to say. So as far as difficulty is concerned, we see people just getting over 60 in most cases throughout the league for wood keys for the active teams. So this to me looks pretty good when it comes to these teams are just able to get 60 and just able to get 48. They played according to the rules of the league, so they're obviously rewarded because they bought into the system. And we can't let V ceilings have too much of an advantage just because they have the most active players by far. 76 wood keys is in any other league it would have won from week 1, even though they went negative on the challenge. Yeah, having teams not close ultimately just promotes undesirable behavior. Reckless, like willingness to accept bad challenges and throwaway points. But the difficulty of those, what I keep trying to say, the difficulty of the keys, wood keys relatively remained the same difficulty each week, but the maps were different difficulties and met different qualities. The invert key difficulty did increase from week 2 to week 3 the most, and then a little tiny bit after week 3 to week 4, but primarily in terms of blue shift just being harder. And then people intentionally didn't bother to get the Wonder of Blue one as worth as much when they could have. You know, I'll blame the world on that one. But it was already pretty late and people earned enough invert keys otherwise, so it wasn't actually a big deal. So gold got a tiny bit worse. Yeah, I'm curious about that filter. Nice mod action. No more saying K. Alright, see juicy. But yeah, gold got a tiny bit harder. And we intended gold to get a little bit harder from week 2 to week 3. It didn't really change that much ultimately. Red and invert got bumped up a little bit as well because gold went up. But silver and wood were intended to be the same because wood was at a pretty good place at the bottom. Wood, in my opinion, it was never meant to be free. Like even the lowest seeded players would still have to work for it. And that varies depending on the player. There's a huge variety of skill levels at the bottom of the league. You know, you know, if you're gonna make a standard normal curve of skill levels in the league, it very much does have a huge tail of, well, the skill level for that bottom tier of players. Some players are newer, but for the most part, they're relatively skilled. It's just that wood key was never 100% out of grasp. I'm not talking about. So what I'm referring to is they can get like 1 or 2 if they both get help from the team and put in reasonable effort. And that the definition of the word reasonable there is going to be the tricky thing for a lot of people, because what I clarify as reasonable doesn't have an actual definition for time associated to it, but it does mean something different for everybody. So some people think I should be able to get wood key within 5 minutes. Some people think half an hour is fair at their skill level. Now, the problem with that is actually these people that have different perceptions of how long it should take them to get a wood or a silver or a gold, they're actually not accounting for other people in their perception. Because if this person thinks that they're deserving of a gold key, but there are considerable tiers that are clearly better than them, how do I account for having different tiers above them? You know, how do I justify having a red, like only a red and an invert above gold, if they think they deserve gold and they're actually one of the worst players in the league, coincidentally? And when I say like a worst player, I'm not trying to say anything bad about them, but at the moment you're just gonna have to deal with it. If I say like a worst player in the league, it's just context driven. I don't want to offend anybody, everybody that is actually playing in the league is really skilled, and I try to talk them up a lot. Like, you always underrate your skill level and all this other stuff. But the worst players that are participating in DLC 4, they are getting a certain number of wood keys and silver keys and rare gold keys. But like, let's look at keys that people are earning. So let me what's an easy way to sort cheat? Okay, sort by K. IRGSW. Alright, here we go. So, in order of keys, here's what we got. So if I look at the bottom, there are this many players that didn't get any keys at all. And that's relatively to be expected. You know, there's always going to be some amount of people that don't do anything. We knew going into the league that like Jadu and Ibums weren't going to do anything. I didn't actually expect certain people like Subpar Fiddle and Timmy to do anything. Maybe they might have played a level once or twice, but they earned no keys, and a wood key is within their skill level probably, sometimes. Now, obviously a lot of these are the Y team, which is a coincidence, but very important that it was that way. But if you were to use this and judge the worst players, then you know, you got some typical candidates of people that you know, they didn't earn any gold keys. Northgate was only active for a couple weeks there, but you know, this is kind of our lowest tier here, obviously including Fims, who earned 1 gold key, and that was it. But for these players, so like we got Phantom Matt over here, earned 1 silver during week 1, 1 silver in week 2, got a few wood keys each week, at least 1 each week. You know, Phantom Matt, not like the most active kind of player, but you know, kind of at the bottom as well. But there's got to be someone that is at the bottom. You know, Phantom Matt takes it in stride, fortunately. Northgate as well. You know, they're here to play. Post Beverage, also relatively new to the community. Got a silver ranking, got 2 silvers. Got a wood plus, got all 6 1 week, but didn't really do much after that. So, you know, a bit of a mix of inactive and also not really getting much. But notice how there are only a few players that are actually getting a lot of wood keys. And we're talking about like the bottom tier. So these are the ones that are most active, but either stopping at wood or silver, and you know, they're just okay with what they're doing. And it's not like to throw shade on them, but well, you know, just by this ranking, they are at the bottom. So we gotta think about like, all right, who are the people that deserve silvers? Who are the people that deserve gold key? Should wood be so easy that you're expected to get wood no matter what, and then it's a little bit of a process to get to silver? And this kind of idea just makes me feel like we don't have enough key types. ultimately. There's not enough at the bottom, because it is very nice to be able to have like some stepping stone that is like on the way to wood key. So if we had like wood 2 and wood 3, you know, 3 different tiers of wood keys, 3 different tiers of silver, you know, it's me, diamond 4 player or whatever. You know, that kind of thing could add value. Do I want to like fully commit to something like that? Maybe, maybe not. I do want to expand it for DLC 5 because I want it to be more encouraging both at the top and the bottom. Because assuming that top layer versus the world is never going to happen again, we need some more stuff at the top. You can believe that. Like invert is not enough. We need keys harder than the blue shift invert, you know? Because like nothing really challenged Fishy. We might as well put up a time that looks borderline impossible. You know, we gotta put the Fishy key. But this kind of distribution's pretty solid, honestly. There were 4 players that got 24 perfect invert keys. 2 for each of these 2 teams. Mike Ether with Quantum Coral making up the next one. HGT somehow pretty high on this list of invert keys earned. Anti-Hoon right behind him. Some of these players that are in this grouping 100% could have joined the 24 invert key gang, but they're just not that committed to it. You know, Nighthawk is certainly that skill level. I think blue shift invert key is the, you know, that was the only real challenge that we had like this for this kind of stuff. But you know, if you were to assume that blue shift were the only one that didn't count, then there was still no one that got 23. So, you know. So it's still not quite good enough. As far as percentiles are concerned, that is one of the things on my list of, you know, possible things to consider. I don't think, so there are some negatives, depending on the kinds of options that I've had in mind. But I do really like the idea of cutoff points. It's very important that we have strict endpoints for players where they can reach their gold and then be like, this is good enough. It's very important to have these clear stopping points for players. That was one of the best things about the key system. You know, that's why it worked. Because we're actually discouraging competition. We're more encouraging the personal improvement. Like, you know, get this goal, which will also help your team. But, you know, only as a team can you together overcome the odds. You know, fun words like that. Just get inspired. Just assume you're inspired. But I think they're pretty good overall. They just, you know, they need that refinement to hold up. So like DLC 3 got refined to what we did, we'll do it again. Challenges, you know, they worked pretty well. The open rules were they were okay. They saved face for the most part. If I let them happen from the beginning, I think it would have backfired pretty badly. You know, they took over for the top player challenges. Top player challenges were somewhat meant to test whether I wanted to do it or not. And the handicap system has its pros and cons. It can let certain people do challenges that otherwise wouldn't do them, but they invite those lose-lose scenarios that I really don't want to have to deal with in future DLCs. So certain kinds of them I don't want to keep going on about. It's just that you know, there are ones that are good, there are ones that are bad. I gotta figure out some way to limit them appropriately, because if I don't limit challenges, then they'll kind of detract from the rest of the league. So it's just a touchy topic. Ultimately, I already touched on them. Nothing that I haven't already said. Side leaderboards. I think they were a somewhat minor failure, having side leaderboards set the way we did them. It was a natural progression from DLC 3, but like DLC 3, it still didn't really go over well. 2-player was the obvious example, where in 2-player we had one per week that did count, and had very little interest. This time had basically no interest, despite having a cool top player versus the world team mechanic, little bonus to the world being able to team up versus top players. But that's not enough, and no one really cared for 2-player anyway. And it's not the kind of thing that people actually want to play. Maybe people will like the 2-player Red Keys race so much tomorrow that they'll change their mind. But if you took 2-player from DLC 3 and then tone it down, people still don't want it. I should probably remove it. Well, if I took side leaderboards from DLC 3 and then I tone it down, people still don't like it. If I tone it down even more to what 2-player just was, people probably wouldn't even bother. So, you know, they're kind of, it's not really looking good for the future of side leaderboards. I don't think they're ever going to be worth fully removing. But I do need to tone them down a little bit and have a better focus on what they accomplish for what they are. Do I think that open rule challenges should replace side leaderboards? No, I don't think open rule challenges are that good of a system to totally replace side leaderboards, because there are pros and cons to both of them. I think the open challenges would, you know, they're, like I was saying with challenges, they're not good enough to put my faith in them as they currently are. I need to switch up how they work a little bit more. You know, gotta keep fine-tuning them. But I can't have two, like, you know, half-effort kind of things. Gotta commit to something. So most people just don't have much interest in them, and that's okay. But when map makers don't have interest in them, it leads to unsatisfactory results a lot of times. A lot of people didn't really want to consider any percent as well. We didn't end up doing many. People shied away from character leaderboards. We tried them very briefly in week 1, but it didn't take off at all. No one considered them at all, unless I would prompt it. Then what else happened? no one really wanted to do any percent. Low percent on Delos Wormhole was the closest thing to an any percent for a while. But yeah, it's just gonna be a hard thing to make right, I think. TAS had a similar experience as Top Players versus the Worlds. I couldn't have a TASer per team. And I wanted to do a cool idea with letting new TASers involved, but that didn't really work out. So it's just not ideal to mix the DLC script with new TASers. And my, I just couldn't commit to doing too much ultimately. So we made a pretty quick pivot during week 1. We figured out we might as well do this in top player challenges instead. And that worked out okay. I'll have to consider in the future what I want to do. But I think it'll be fine for what I already have in mind. Map quality was pretty good this time. I don't want to actually say it was actually that good. But I do think this was probably the best on average for any DLC maps. So for you guys that think these maps were good, that's great. For anyone that thought that they didn't like the maps for any reason, that's totally fair. I think that's justified. I do think this had the best average DLC map quality. But I do think I would attribute some player disinterest to the maps specifically, especially practice week and week 2. They were a bit oppressive. Very intense kinds of maps. It was not the key difficulty that got players to quit, it was the map awkwardness and how unruly some of them were to play. So I need to have simpler maps in the future that are more inviting to players. I should have known better in practice week, obviously. But that's an easy fix. Just make a really, really easy practice week maps that people are not expected to grind too much. But on the other hand, that's kind of what to expect from some DLC maps too. That's just what they're like. Have difficulty in mind. Not a bad idea, but it just doesn't work for DLC in my experience. So there are a lot of ideas that have been tried in the past. And there are a lot of ideas that on paper sound like they might be okay, but they just don't fit DLC. They would fit better in other environments. I do not think an actually difficult week would go over well in DLC. But I do really wish I could do that idea. Especially because people don't really know how to make difficulty without adding dwarfs everywhere. But when I talk about level difficulty, I primarily refer to so there are two types of difficulty. I think the maps were difficult to play. They were difficult to execute, and they were overwhelming. They had bad first experiences. Not like horrendous bad, but they were not ideal. So that's a different kind of difficulty than something that just kills you over and over. Because some people are surprisingly accepting of that kind of scenario. But it's a different kind of difficulty. People have evolved in terms of their DLC map preferences. There's been a gradual meta to the types of maps that we've seen in DLC. In DLC 2, with the adoption of the no replay script, we really accelerated this by seeing some really complex maps that have wild routing and stuff like that. In DLC 3, we learned to tone it down a little bit because that's not actually that fun. And we've gradually continued more in that direction since then, in my opinion. It's good to have a little variety, but I'll share the map results in a moment. I do think we need some levels that are easier to grind, like Downward Spiral. I don't think that was a particularly good map, but it was good for DLC. Could have still been improved a fair amount, is what I'm trying to say, for DLC and in general. But still, still one of the better received maps and most played. People not liking maps like Isosceles, pretty good example map. Alright. The short maps also were some of the least played ones. So I'm going to look at a bunch of stats and some other stuff in a moment. I'm just kind of gathering it on the other screen. I do have the best map poll. So we have some people from different teams that did stuff. I try to zoom in. My scroll wheel says no. Alright, favorite aesthetic theme. People like week 3 for both of the themes for some reason. Week 3 was actually a pretty divisive theme. A lot of people that liked it, a lot of people that didn't. But more people that liked it that voted for it than any particular other week. Still not enough for a majority, but people like pillars. No dying, pretty reliable as well. Week 1 got a decent amount of votes too. Pretty good. Favorite map, we have Urban Undergrowth at 9, Blue Shift at 8. We have 2 5s at Smelloscope and Waifophobia. OJ Factory got a 4 for favorite. People were allowed to vote for their 3 favorite maps. These obviously are not majorities either. We had a lot of variety, a lot of team favoritism in voting as well throughout the weeks. But people like those top player maps, especially the ones that got C's help on art and then C made Blue Shift. Most grindworthy map, Blue Shift. Good to see people liked that. Nominated Decay had a few votes too, and Waipophobia. But not any strong contenders here other than Blue Shift. Downward Spiral, pretty often played, but kind of falls in with the rest of them, not standing out. Map aesthetics, OJ Factory and Expedition actually had the most votes for aesthetics. Personally, I didn't really think that hard about aesthetics myself when it comes to this question, so I'm relatively more surprised on this one. I didn't really think about any of them in this kind of manner, but this is what most people voted for. Whether they were, whether anyone was on the same team as any votes for any categories, You know, it's just a popularity contest. But getting half the votes is always good. Best theme usage, also a strange one for people to vote on, in my opinion. But I left it there. Blue Shift narrowly winning the narrow with 1 vote. Probably the only noteworthy use of narrow on any of those maps. No dying. Well, there was no dying. So I don't know about good uses of no dying, honestly. And then as for like use of the aesthetic theme, hard to judge. You know, take it as you will. For best side leaderboard, a lot of people voted for Blue Shift Apple SS, apparently. Slightly unexpected, in my opinion, but still pretty cool. You know, not that many people grinded it. Also, not too many people ended up playing low percent on Urban Undergrowth, but that got some votes. Dash Forever Any Percent surprisingly got 4. I remember checking this early and only had 1, which was 100% Quantum Coral. Wipophobia Kid Any Percent. A little surprising to see Kid Any Percent up there as well. But all kinds of votes on this level, on this category. Favorite map maker team, top map makers. No doubt here. You know, who could possibly beat the top map makers? Even if you took out C, we had some pretty good maps. Top players win again. But what C did, just to clarify, he made the art for Urban Undergrowth and then made Blue Shift. So, however much you want to add that, you know, go ahead. But C definitely part of top map makers, the team. Best team. But pretty spread out, you know, pretty even maps. Good from each of the map makers. But C most valuable map maker. Thanks for the feedback, Issa. We had an ARB vote in here. Big Diesel. People voting for people that were on their teams. Most valuable players. We got some Plant votes. It was certainly very valuable to Plant's team. We have everybody that was on the Y team. Anti-Hoon got a vote in here. Most valuable is technically ARB in terms of points. So a lot of these answers are wrong. Fishy was next if you want to be most valuable, because Fishy pretty much contributed to most of the world records. But that's just because Top Players vs. the World was a side event. Yeah, you can expect some similarities to DLC 5, but as always, I will mix it up. And your little spoiler is that DLC 5 is going to be unlike any of the DLCs before it. A little bit more than normal. Honorable mentions. Time to hope that these are safe to read. you, the person reading this, applies to so many of us. So, shoutouts to the people that got honorable mentions, I guess. Issa getting all the credit for recruiting somehow. Recruited the most inactive players. Perhaps. But just joking. It always helps. How many people voted for Naglaria? I don't know. There were 3. I'm just teasing. Alright. What else? I wanted to show something else. Oh, I made okay, I think that's 100% now. I can't use my scroll wheel very well. I made a very dumb looking key stats page as well. Control 0, that's useful to know. Thanks. Aggregate on map ratings, yeah, there is. There is also that. I do have this. So, the average scores don't mean anything because they're taken within the context of the league of that week. But if you want to get technical, we have Blue Shift at 4.2. We have Sugamite all the way at the bottom with no favorite votes. This is rated by, this is ordered by amount of favorite votes. Sugamite somehow got a lot of 4s thanks to, I presume, V Ceilings voting for it in one poll but not the other. Blue Shift had 1 less favorite vote than Urban Undergrowth. Grind is most playable, playability or whatever. You know, these are just the numbers. You know, relatively matching it. Figurative Garbage, not last. Not as bad as Isosceles, according to week 4 voters. How many others are on a cow camel? Would like to know. This one. 4. All right. Okay, so here's another sheet that's hard to read, but I don't care. So how you should look at this is there were 365 total invert keys that were earned in DLC 4. This made up 20.6% of all players' completions on all levels. If you just go by people that completed the level, that's 28% of all completions on levels. But if you include the people that opted not to play the level at all, then that's only 20.6%. So if you include people that didn't play, it's 20.6. If you don't include the people that didn't play a level, out of all possible completions, then it's 28%. So invert keys, pretty high percentage. This is the same case for Ike Ether. They had more people that earned invert keys. Team V Ceilings had the most people that earned invert keys. These are just the total number of keys earned. Then we have the total number of keys earned per week, also per team. So you can see a gradual decline of total inverts earned because they do get a little harder, especially between weeks 2 and 3. And the number of people actually actively playing also decreases. You can see that. So here, this NA, not applicable, this refers to people that... Alright, that's just adding up. This refers to people that did not play a level at all. So there are 444 possible completions. I think I made a mistake on this one. Oh, I'll fix it later. But there are 444 possible completions, you know, of all teams, all players. And the number of people that did not play a level increased each week. People that completed the level but did not get a key remained similar. It went up between first half and second half. We can see, we can also see in this total list, people that or the number of total completions on levels. So, like, Ike Ether had one more total completion than V Ceilings did. Argon Avengers had fewer total completions. Y Team had the most possible players, but had the lowest percentage of active players, because although they had the largest team, that also included people that contributed nothing at all. So they have the lowest percentage of active players. But we can also see, out of all completions, how many of them at least earned Wood Key, which was actually highest on Enthusiast Enjoyers. For people that completed the levels, they also usually got Wood Keys. But that's percentage-wise, though. But the highest number of Wood Keys still went to the top 2 teams. Now, I did this for each map. I don't rank them anywhere, but we can see things like, you know, you can look at these yourself and be like, oh, look, these short levels have the lowest number of invert keys earned on them because they are least often played. There are more people that don't play them, even though they're much easier. We can also see, like, which were the least commonly earned keys in the league. These are the kind of stats that, you know, I basically dipped my toes into and didn't really finish doing anything about, similar to how any other stats that I could have done. And I'll just do some fun stuff on my own time with them. So if you ever return to this sheet, I'll probably add some other stats stuff on the bottom like this one and make a little bit more out of it. But I do have some cool stats that you can look at. Anyway, maps were okay. They were sufficient. Schedule worked out. Early deadlines mitigated the sniping, I already said. The secret key times went well. People seem to appreciate that. You know, there's always a little mystery, like, did I get the invert or the red? I did like how that worked out. Can't satisfy everyone's schedules, though. It's less exciting when it's too lenient and spread out, though, so it's tough to balance. Still rare to see people update their PBs, so I don't really like how it worked out ultimately. Too many negatives. The overall schedule remains exhausting. It was reliable, we just copied DLC 3s. It's always been on my mind, should this be shorter? And there's a burnout to content trade-off, which I think we somewhat clearly need to reconsider that. So as long as I can make it feel complete with less, I'm still pretty likely to consider less. I just need the overall schedule to work. But you know, we've tried break week a couple times now. It's just a band-aid to the problem. I don't think it's a good long-term solution. Which means I'll have to reconsider the map making schedule as well. So schedule is reliable, but I'm gonna shake it up, I think. Map making, people handle themes pretty well, but I also basically had no oversight on them. I was extremely lenient and didn't even bring it up at all. But there were no problems about it. Kept it open-ended. I clearly didn't finish this. But I didn't give any prompts to teams to choose the themes, so I kept them safe and simple, open-ended. It worked out pretty well. It was just the practice week maps and reaching out to C for the week 3 and 4 ones. Almost got Twinkie to make one of the themes. The schedule held up okay, but people always they make it pretty bad, especially at the end. Although things get released on time, I have huge problems with having to deal with people that don't respect deadlines. So I have to come up with something to handle this, because I don't want to be put in that kind of situation. Because it's it's not just Issa that gave me an issue with this. But we the deadlines are there to mitigate risk. There's certainly a lot of behind the scenes risk that could happen if they do not work out. For example, one of them was the re-upload that was necessary on Space Monastery. But it was easy enough to work out. I've done it before, so we're ready to do what we need to do. And if the top map makers ever need to step in and make another map, we are ready to do that. But fortunately, we have not needed to do that. But it turns out there really aren't that many interested map makers. People just are not willing to finish their maps or make maps in general. So even though the themes in the schedule worked, and there were a couple minor errors because I switched some things around, there's just not... The teams are a little spread too thin, in my opinion. Most teams let one person do a map each, and didn't really make it much of a team effort. There was not enough playtesting as originally intended. I can improve on that myself, because the top players somewhat took care of, we somewhat stood in where needed. But DLC maps work as is a lot of the time, which is sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing. It only backfires when there's like really horrible stuff to play in levels. So as long as the people play their levels, then we're good. Recap streams are pretty bad in my opinion. I need someone that can either be dedicated to doing it. Kind of like how this is a pretty bad stream. But it is what it is. I could do with some more preparation. But if I'm the only one doing a lot of this stuff, and I'm not really I'm just doing this for fun on my own time. I just do what I can, and sometimes I can't really commit to as much as I'd like to. So the more I can do in advance, the better. If I'm on a team, that severely hinders what I'm able to do for all other teams. So I don't really want to continue playing in DLC for that reason primarily, myself, because I can at least improve the experience for everybody if I don't participate, and I avoid possible conflicts of interest. And DLC isn't really made for me either. I'm not that competitive of a person. Which, as a top player member, might sound a little backwards that I'm not as competitive, but I am not known for bopping people back on anything. That's what people like Fishy are there for. I mean, I've done my share of competing. It's just that, I don't care. I'm not that invested in it. I'm only ranked high at the top because no one else is. You know, if people put in the time, they can easily get up there. But yeah, I am 100% a target to be beaten. Because I just get routes for my stuff up there, and then don't usually get it perfect. So good luck to the people that want to grind. But that's just me. Like, I'm in it to just, do what I want. I'm not in it to go back and forth with somebody. You know, if I want to do a cool route, I'll just do my cool route and leave. That's what I do on levels. So I enjoy stuff like tasks more. And I'll be more interested in competing on those kinds of things than other things. But, if someone beats me, then it is what it is. I wasn't putting it up there for you. But that's just the kind of mentality that separates like real top players and people that are just temporarily top players. In summary though, it was alright, I guess. It wasn't that good. It went pretty well on the surface. I had a lot of problems behind the scenes with how it turned out. A lot of it was just a bit underwhelming. But things were very enjoyable for a lot of people, and that's great. That's what I like to see. That's why I do it. I much more enjoy putting things on for other people than actually participating myself a lot of the time. It just kind of sucks when I'm also a high seed, so I've somehow run into the same issue that I did in the Smash community, where I'm a high local seed, but I prefer running tournaments rather than actually playing. So it unfortunately devalues anything if I don't also participate, but then creates a stupid conflict of interest issue. So it kind of demotivates me from actually getting involved in either side that I want to do. I'm not really I just do what I want. We could do with some better maps. That'd be nice, I think. We spread teams a little too thin, in my opinion. It'll be hard to validate having any bigger kinds of teams or more teams. We are still going. This is the end. When's DLC 5? September, October. I'm not sure exactly what I'll do for it yet, but I've had my ideas since DLC 4 was started. There are some ideas that I do want to tease for the fans that I'm looking for some early feedback, I guess, related to this. So, DLC 5. I'm thinking of, I want to do some kind of rival system, but I don't know what that's going to entail yet. And one related thing that I would like to do is some kind of bop timer. Like, imagine challenges or some kind of environment where you have a day to bop somebody. So, you know, you're doing a challenge with somebody, you and your boy out there on downward spiral any percent. Someone gets a new PB, the other person has 1 day to try to bop them. Within that 1 day, if they bop them, the timer resets. And this goes until either the timer runs out or until the final deadline hits. So that's an interesting kind of idea that would actually encourage competition rather than you just get a time and leave. So that's not something for everybody. It's something more along the lines of challenges, and would potentially fit with the rival system, but I don't know what I want to do with the rival system. I just think it would be very interesting if maybe instead of signing up with people that you want to team with, you sign up with possible rivals in mind, with like, I want to be a rival with this guy this week, or this guy this week, or maybe there is a little bit of random assignment to it, because this is going to be a very important little section here that will shape how DLC 5 works, right here at the bottom. I want to revisit chaotic mechanics, because then I can dodge the balance issues, which are inevitable, and the activity stuff is inevitable. But if teams feel like they have a chance of winning, they don't quit. You know, that's pretty nice. So if we had a perfectly balanced kind of league, sounds like that'd be pretty cool, but it would suck to tie on everything, so it couldn't be perfectly balanced. So we see this in every league. We also see the over either memeing or infatuation with the word tier, whether it's in DLC 3 or DLC 4, people somehow putting importance on those kinds of aspects, even though they're very clearly made to not matter. But we tried it out a little in DLC 3 for the second half, doing it, and that would not have worked good in a long-term scenario, in my opinion. But I have some ideas for what I would do. Thanks for your input yet again. Does anyone have any questions? I did address possible questions that came up because I didn't have many from the feedback. But this is pretty much what's up for the postmortem. You know, that is about it. Well, we have one question. Am I annoying you? You're not annoying me. Take that as you will, I guess. But that's not very interesting discussion, you know? Let me look at the feedback and see if there was anything that stands out. I would really like it if people filled out the polls that maybe Idle could post again, because I don't have them ready. You don't need to fill out that map one anymore. We already saw the results. But hold on. Alright, just want to not show certain things on stream. Because I have limited space. Okay. I do not have many people that filled out the event form. That's something that I would really like people to look into. So I posted this in the Dust Force Discord. I'd really like it if people had some opinion on the kinds of events that we're gonna do in the future. And if anyone wants to work on maps with anyone else for any special reason, please fill out the form. That's the events/projects form. That's also in the Dust Force Discord. If you want to do, like, for example, Cyber Complex 5, or if you want to do maps for another CMR, or if you want to just have another map jam, or if you just want to watch a blind relay blitz, that's all what I want to hear. So I'd really appreciate it if people filled out the events/projects form right there in chat. General feedback, that's just what I'm looking at right now. Would I prefer if DLC had a similar number of signups as it did this time? We had the most number of people that signed up this time, by a fair margin. I can't really say that, it's not like that much more than DLC 1 or DLC 3. It is slightly more. There's just a lot of people that don't really do much, and there are very few people that do a lot. So I don't actually try to promote DLC to the people that I know are going to be inactive. I want them to at least feel like they're part of a team if they're going to participate. But I don't like it if they feel like they're just a number, like they're just +1 on their team and they actually take up space, and it means it's a negative. They aren't going to do anything. So in the case of someone like JDude or iBums, they made this clear before DLC started that they weren't going to do anything, so they didn't count for anything when it came to making teams. They just were added to the Y team at the end, and we're like, all right, they don't count for anything. Don't expect anything from them. This was different from people that signed up but they weren't sure if they're going to do anything, which is still different than people that signed up that actually didn't do anything at all. Like at least one person just left the Discord before we even started, really. So I can't really do anything about that, but I'd probably prefer if they didn't sign up, you know? But there's always a little of that, so that's why I also don't push too hard on signups, because I want to make sure that the right people are getting on teams to an extent. You know, they're actually a little tiny bit invested in trying to participate. But it would be nice to get other people that are otherwise active in the community involved, because I do think they'd enjoy themselves. Because there are people that play that didn't participate, and there are people that were on teams that did things other than play in the league. So that's more of a DLC problem than otherwise in some respects. But we'll take whatever we get. It's always nice to be able to say, like, this is the biggest one ever. I don't see anything that really stands out that I didn't address in the feedback though, so I think that's pretty much gonna wrap it up. You know, just under 3 hours. Good little lecture. Any final questions? Favorite song? Probably The Magnetic Tree. Also like Undiscovery. I don't know the answer to any other questions in the world. You're welcome for the hard work. We're gonna raid someone very far in advance.